This is the third talk of the series of 7 presentations, Archaic period in ancient numismatics, 650, 480 BC. Ancient coins are studied in different periods depending on stylistic changes on engraving art and historical events. I want to quote here my friend and colleague Wayne Salas from his Ancient Coin Collecting book number 2. Says it must be noted that it never occurred to the Greeks or any other ancient civilization that there was an archaic period or a classical period, nor did they think of themselves as a nation, much less citizens of the Hellenistic period. So we have to keep that in mind when we study ancient history. This is the age of symbolism. The Archaic period to art historians began earlier, but for numismatists, it may be dated approximately from 650 to 480 BC. What do we see? What do we mean by age of symbolism? We have animals, mythological creatures, plants, mostly symbols that cities adopted to identify themselves or to identify their coins with. Later, they added depictions of God, goddesses, and other deities. So we're going to see a lot of symbolism on this in this period. You cannot really separate numismatic art from other types of art. So if you look at the sculpture of that period, you can see the parallels easily. They have a stiff and rigid appearance, similar to that of the Egyptian and the Hittite sculpture. This period marks a transition period between the geometric and classical period. Alongside of patterns and abstract forms of the geometric period, a more individualized style was adopted in this period. What do we mean by that? You see here, increasing wealth and a rise in civic pride influenced the commissioning of bigger temples, dedications, and graves in this period. Subject matter was expanded toward the end of this period. Direct representation of historical events were rare, but myths were often used in their place. Many features of this period can be traced on ancient coins. And here the Hittite and Phrygian art pieces for you to compare and how they influence the design of certain coins in that period. Again, we have this famous depiction of lion and bull confrontation. And it is not something that the coin designers of that time, the Lydian coin designers, came up with. It was a very well-known symbol since the middle Hittite period, 1300 BC, as you see here, and then here later. And then this one is Phrygian from Gordian, 8th, 7th century BC. Here you see 2 gods, a higher level god and then the storm god. The higher level god is actually sitting on a bull, and storm god is sitting on a crouching lion. So, and then here you have the lion and bull with human bodies, again confronting one another. And we have more, of course, mythological figures coming from the western and eastern part of the Aegean. Griffin is a common type that we see on coins. Legendary creature with the body of a lion and the head and wings of an eagle. So you have two majestic animals combined in one creature, and it is adopted by one of the ancient polis or poli for their identification. And you can see the griffin's female-headed sphinx on coins as well. Now, ancient numismatics, the art and science of studying ancient coins, was incorrectly and unfairly associated with coin collecting for many years. This is a very, very major issue, and for many years, ancient coins and the importance of ancient numismatics were overlooked by historians and archaeologists. For centuries, yes, wealthy people collected coins, kings and queens and wealthy people collected coins, but it would be extremely unfair to leave the huge field of ancient numismatics to those simple collectors. They had the money, they were purchasing valuable coins, but maybe they were studying them too. But just because wealthy people collected ancient coins doesn't necessarily mean that it should be neglected. But it was neglected for many years. And then once it was picked up, misconceptions came along. So when you look at these coins, they're all called Greek coins. So I again quote here from Jenkins from his Ancient Greek Coins book. The general tradition of Greek coinage was taken up in antiquity by non-Greek people, by many non-Greek people who came more or less under the spell of Greek culture and adopted their coinage from the same source. Most of this coinage is, by convention, included in the scope of what is called Greek coins. You can overlook the realities of ancient historical facts and just agree with him, but it's not true. Many of these people did not come under the spell of Greek culture. It was not the Greek culture, it was the culture of the whole Mediterranean. And attributing it to the Greeks would be an extreme unfair treatment of other civilizations around the Mediterranean. At least that's how I feel about it. And here are some thoughts for everyone. The trading networks of the 14th and 13th century BCE, Eastern Mediterranean, were produced by centuries of individual and corporate entrepreneurship, diplomacy, and imperialism that culminated in the linkage of the Mycenaeans, Hittites, Cypriots, Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, and smaller polities amongst them. So there was trade, and there was more trade than wars, actually. And the ancient historian interested in studying Mediterranean traders must sail carefully through the ancient literature. First, he or she must put aside modern concepts of supply and demand and embrace a traditional value economy that often sought reward, not in profit, but rather in influence. Really, when you look at the coins, you will see that they are advertising their individualism, their personal being. So it was the polis and the individual polis that was the most important thing at that time. Focusing mostly on wealthy kings and emperors and their golden glorious wars, we have overlooked fundamental achievements of simple people like sailors, traders, artisans, and farmers. And ancient coins simply show us that people also existed together with kings and queens and emperors. In this presentation, I'm going to show you coins from about 60 cities. It is overwhelming. I know it is overwhelming, but it is intentional. I want to show you that there is overwhelming material to study in ancient numismatics, and the coins were not invented and used for military campaigns only. I am going to follow a path that I created for this presentation. So I start from the east. In numismatic cataloging traditions, people usually start from the west, and they go all the way to the east and make a turn to the south, and then make another turn and go back to the west, but I'm just following my own path here. So in Asia, that's what it used to be called at that time. There were many cities, of course. I didn't put all the cities that minted coinage at that time, but most of them. The Ionian cities were Miletus, Myos, Trene, Ephesus, Colophon, Lepidus, Chios, Eritrea, Clazomenea, Smyrna, and Phocaea. And then the islands, Samos and Chios. So these were all cities that cherished the individual character of the polis. They had absolute autonomy, and even though they had some common interest that would unite them here and there, they never formed a real confederacy like the Achaeans or Boeotians. The advice of Thales, of Miletus, to combine in a political union was rejected at that time. And they suffered, of course, the consequences. When the Persians came, they had to submit to them, only to revolt in time, but their freedom, their autonomy was more important than anything else. So they could not think of being part of a confederacy or a union. The first city that I would like to talk about is Ephesus, the city of Heraclitus. I don't know if you studied the life and legacy of Heraclitus, but I would definitely recommend that you do that. He is famous for the phrase that I put here, Pantarei. It always flows. The river that you bathed a minute ago is gone. You never bathe in the same river twice, he said. So everything changes is what he was trying to say at that time. He was one of the earliest nature scientists, as opposed to philosophers who study the idea of thought. The Ionian scientists were studying the nature, the universe. So it's really interesting. And at that time, we see the city of Ephesus, one of the centers of its time, adopting a bee as their symbol. And as we know, bee is the attribute of Artemis. And Artemis was the chief deity of the city. Now you see we have here drums and then another drum here, and then an oboe and a hemi-oboe and a third or fourth oboe here. Now, from the beginning, there is a denominational system, as you can see. So these, you don't only have big coins. The argument by some scholars and mostly archaeologists is that those coins were only used for military payments. That's not true. These are small change. Yes, they were extremely valuable at that time too, and yes, they were not easy to own by everyone. Yet these small denominations, look at these, how small these are, and they were used to facilitate commerce at that time. And then we have Miletus or Miletus, as some people pronounce it. It's the city of Thales, again following the path of Heraclitus, or Heraclitus followed Thales's path. The city, thanks to him, was called the birthplace of the modern science. Home of Thales, the father of physiology, not philosophy, and his followers, Anaximander and Anaximenes. Miletus was the intellectual and commercial capital of the ancient world in the century before Athens rose to prominence. And on their coins, you see this roaring line in various forms. And then they minted very, very small denominations. Again, clear indication that coinage was for mostly commerce, but not only for military campaigns or large payments. Clazomenae is another interesting city of Ionia. It's the town of Anaxagoras. He was a member of the Ionian school, a mathematician famed for introducing the spirit of scientific inquiry from Ionia to Athens. So he moved to Athens at some point. It is said that he left his wealth and political career because of a fear that they would hinder his search for knowledge. He was imprisoned for claiming that the sun was not a god and that the moon reflected the sun's light. So he had to run from Athens back to Asia. And the coins of this city usually depict head of ram and forepart of winged boar. Yes, winged boar is a mythological animal, and also you have a mythological figure here, Gorgoneon. But actually, this city's chief deity was Apollo, and the boar is one of the attributes of Apollo. And how about the head of ram? Ram is an attribute of Hermes, right? So he's the messenger of gods. He's the oracle of Apollo, gives the message to Hermes, and Hermes carries it around. There is always a story to tell. There is always this individualism that they have to boast about. Eritrea is another rich town that struck electrum coins early on. The story is that Eritros, one of several sons of King Codrus of Athens, who were said to have founded cities in Ionia, his city was Eritrea on its coins, and eponymous hero Eritros is named as its Ktistas, the founder, as you see here. However, there are coins that were struck earlier in this city. So you have a lot of stories about Greek colonists traveling to certain places and colonizing those places, founding cities. I don't want to call it a lie, but it's not true. There were cities before the so-called Greek colonists arrived, and they were flourishing towns. They only accepted immigrants, and they didn't mind sharing their land with the new immigrants. The superiority of the Greeks was admittedly their language and their ambition to show it. And that is one of the reasons why many people think that those coins are Greek coins, whereas actually it's those coins simply carry the characteristics of each and every individual city at that time. Chios was a city famous for its wine exportation. The Chian amphoras with the characteristic Sphinx emblem and a bunch of grape have been found in nearly every country that the Chians traded with, from as far away as Gaul, Egypt, and Eastern Russia. And on their coins, they have their famous Sphinx and amphora. And this is the land of Hippocrates. This is a different Hippocrates from that of the island coast, the father of medicine. This gentleman was a merchant, but he was not a good merchant. He lost a lot of money. He was not very successful in his business enterprises, but a good mathematician. The reductio ad absurdum, the Latin term for proof by contradiction, is attributed to him. He was the first to write a systematic organized geometry textbook called Stoicheia Elements. You have Phocaea, modern Foça in Turkey. The seal was the badge of this city, and a small one normally appears next to the main type to identify the city's coinage. And from early on, you see a seal on the coinage of this city. They didn't only mint electrum coins, they also minted silver coins. And as you see, they minted coins in many denominations to accommodate and facilitate commerce. There is more. Herodotus says the Phocaeans were the first people to make long sea voyages, and they discovered the coast of the Adriatic, Tyrrhenia, and Spain. They are best known for having founded the colony of Massalia, modern Marseille, in 600 BC. And look at these types. Look at the wealth of variety of types. I'm only showing you a handful of what is available from this city. And why did they have to create so many different types? Because they could. The answer is very simple, because they could. Samos is the city of the famous mathematician Pythagoras. He was also a philosopher, founder of the mystic, religious, and scientific society called Pythagoreans. His legacy is well known, but not many people know his connection to the city of Samos. And on the obverse and reverse, sometimes we see the skull of a lion facing, an attribute to Hercules, of course. Hercules killed the man lion and unskinned it, and so it must have something to do with that. And then there is the forepart of a bull here, and then there is a winged boar. So they seem to combine mythological stories with mythological animals and gods. Just because it is interrelated, I put this slide here. Zankle, in 493, accepts a group of Samian refugees to settle nearby after Samos fell to the Persians. However, the Samians chose to seize the undefeated city itself at the behest of Anaxilas of Rhegion. Afterwards, the Samians betrayed Anaxilas and allied themselves with Hippocrates of Gela. Around 488 BC, Anaxilas suppressed the Samian rulers, seized Zankle, and resettled it with colonists from Peloponnesian Messenia. In honor of their loyalty, Anaxilas renamed the city Messena after their homeland. And you see the Samian influence on the early coinage of this city. And another Ionian city worth mentioning is Teos. They also chose a griffin as the symbol of their city and minted coinage in at least 5 denominations. And it is the city of Anacreon, a lyric poet notable for his drinking songs and hymns. Here is a poem by this poet. I'm not going to read it, as my reading might not be so good. But it's nice to read poetry from 2,600 years. And what is interesting on this coin that I would like to draw your attention to it is something that the engraver put under the griffin, and it is identified as human testicles. It might have something to do with fertility, but it is something worth further study, I guess. Also, this place is the birthplace of Bekircan, preserver of Aristotle's works, a famous book collector in the 1st century BC. His collection included a remarkable old copy of the Iliad. Speaking of famous books, it's worth mentioning how much we have lost in history, rather than how much we have accomplished. So many books were burned down. So many books got lost and never survived. But love of books, we understand that was always there, and people collected books in ancient times as well. Now we are in Aiolia, and we have Mytilene and Lesbos on the island. Mytilene minted a lot of Electrum coins, again with many different types. It's overwhelming. It's just a small island, and you have several cities minting coinage. And it is the island of Sappho, the female, so-called first female, but I don't think she was the first. I'm sure there were other poets before her. The bulk of her poetry has been lost, but her reputation is immense. Plato called her the 10th muse, and the rest of the ancient critics agreed at that time. But as a small town, as a small island, having several cities producing coinage is very, very remarkable. Kyzikos on the Dardanelles is another town with incredible legacy of coinage. Again, they minted a lot of electrum. I haven't read anything about the source of electrum that they used to strike coins, but they were very wealthy and they had access to precious metals. So when I prepared this presentation, 240 different designs were noted, but I'm sure by now this number increased to 260, 270, if not 300, because it was a very important trading post, and they issued many coins, including silver ones. And again, I emphasize the fact that these coins mostly were used in trade, but not to finance military campaigns. Lampsakos is famous for Priapos, the fertility god. And Pausanias says, this god is worshipped where goats and sheep pasture or there are swarms of bees. But by the people of Lampsakos, he is more revered than any other god, being called by them a son of Dionysus and Aphrodite. Earlier coins don't show any depictions of Priapos, but I guess the mythological story was picked up later, and you see a lot of phallic depictions on the coinage of this city. Tenedos from the beginning adopted Zeus and Hera's heads, Janiform heads, and you can see the archaic rigid designs of the faces on all three coins. Apparently, they were struck in different periods within maybe 50 years. You don't need to pay attention to the dates that are given here. They're mostly auction catalogers thinking, I should say. But Lampsakos certainly chose different figures to represent themselves. For part of winged horse was their main symbol, yet you have Janiform female head wearing diadem here, and then head of Athena, again in late Archaic style. Knidos in Caria was the famous town of Aphrodite, and from the beginning you see that Aphrodite is their accepted symbol on their coins. One side head of line their allegiance with Miletus, and then on the other side they have Aphrodite. This sculpture, of course, is later from the 350s, by Praxiteles. But I just wanted to put it here to emphasize the importance of the cult of Aphrodite in this city. And certainly the depictions of Aphrodite are all in the archaic style. In certain coins, this one, and this one, Aphrodite seems to be looking down. Her, a little bit shy of her nudeness, I guess. But in earlier archaic depictions, she is almost smiling on this coin and on this coin and this one. So I separated them from the others. There are small messages on each coin if you look and examine them carefully. Halicarnassus, the home of one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, was not very productive at the beginning, even though it was a very prosperous city and city of Herodotus. And you have Mylassa, Kaunos, and Kos in Caria. Again, Kos is a very small town, yet they had good doctors, and they became famous in ancient times. Mylassa adopted similar 4-part of lion symbol from Miletus to show their allegiance to that city. And later on, Kaunos came up with this winged female running, looking back type that many people confused until 20, 30 years ago with Malus types. Again, a mythological figure that they came up with. Most likely it's Aphrodite again, but with wings and maybe some other deity, I don't know. And a coin for Kos, you have the depiction of a crab. Later in the next presentation, you will see much nicer, improved depictions of crabs on the coinage of the city. But at the beginning, this is what they did. Another strategically important island, Rhodes, or as we call it in Turkish, Rhodos, and in Greek, there were again several cities that minted coins: Camiros, Lindos, Ailsos, just a larger island than Samos and Chios, of course. And it's on the crossroads of seafarers, and that's only fair that they were prosperous, and a lot of goods were carried and maybe emptied in the harbors of these cities from the east, and then and shipped off to the west to Greece. That's why these cities became very, very prosperous. And there is the fig leaf here chosen as the badge of this city. There must be a story behind that, of course, which I don't know about, but being on the Mediterranean, we are going to see other planned depictions on coins of some other cities, and then maybe we can combine them and come up with an idea as to why these people chose these symbols. Then in Lycia, it's a very unique geographical region, and people, they seem to have chosen a different administrative path than other cities. there were dynasties ruling over a certain geographical area, and they were happy with that system. In fact, when the United States, before the United States was incorporated, the founding fathers examined, they say, the Lycian dynasties and wanted to see how they ruled, how they governed their land. And they obviously didn't favor that idea. Yet, for many, many years, even during the Roman period, there were only few cities minted coins in Lycia. And so whatever system that they had was favored by the majority of the Lycians, and they were happy with that. And as you see, depending on the dynasty, they chose different symbols on their coins. Phaselis and Patara are two cities, again, part of the dynastic rule. And they seem to be more productive and a little different path from the others. Even though geographically Phaselis was part of Lycia, it minted its own coins that we can identify with the city, and it's usually Pro of Galley on one side, and then irregular in Kuskar square on the back. And as time goes by, the Pro becomes more visible. It's in the form of a boar's head, very distinctive symbol for the city of Phaselis. And Patara, it's a wonderful Roman city right now being excavated. I was there 2 years ago. They have done a great job excavating the amphitheater, as you see here, and the other parts of the city. But as you see, and when you read the stories about this, again, it's a colony of some Greek rulers, this and that, but it is not true, actually. The excavators found civilization in that area dating to much earlier times than before the Greeks arrived. And on the coinage of the city, you have crab, and then crab with fishing hook. It's unbelievable. It tells us something that I don't have any idea about, but it tells us that there were individually selected symbols for those cities. And here is a coin from the Lycian dynasty Aphrodite. And you have Cyprus. They somehow associated themselves with the mythology of Hercules or Heracles, and early coinage of this city has a lot of depictions of Heracles. Then later, the dynasty, majority of this of the coins were struck by certain dynasties at that time, and Ram is the symbol of one of them, the Elton. I don't know if it has anything to do with Hermes, this reclining or kneeling ram, but it is an interesting coin. And on the reverse of these are usually blank. For some reason, either they didn't have good coin die engravers, or they didn't care. They decided to leave the other side of their early coins blank. Now we are heading to the northeast, Thrace and Macedon. There are so many cities that minted coinage in the Archaic period, but there are also these tribes that never became a city, but they were known and identified with their coinage. Oops. And I have some cities that I would like to talk about in this region. In Macedon, the Kai. Again, their symbol or deity or chief deity was the hero demigod Hercules or Heracles. You can see the archaic artistic features of the head of Hercules wearing lion's skin headdress. And on the reverse of this coin is an interesting depiction, a cock with a worm in its beaks. And it must be suggesting a story of the city at that time. The coinage of Sicyon is remarkable in that they use one of their first regular human individual. On this coin, there is an unidentified head of a youth. But when we look at the other issue coming from this city, we easily know who they are talking about. This is Protesilaus. Those who read the Iliad by Homerus will easily remember this individual. He was the leader of the Phylacians in the Trojan War. An oracle had prophesied that the first Greek to walk on the land after stepping off a ship would be the first to die. After Odysseus tossed his shield ashore and jumped onto it, Protesilaus, with knowledge of the prophecy, fulfilled this. So he was a hero of his time. And even though it was just a legend, the city adopted this legend. And guess what? They put the name of this person around the helmet. So it reads here, I guess it is retrograde. It's from this part, it goes all the way here, Protesilaus. Lete is another interesting town, decided to use mythological figures, mostly in the form of nude and ithopalic satire and nymph. On the coinage of the city, you always have the same idea. You have a satire. In this case here, it's a centaur or centaur, and maybe kidnapping a nymph. Here they're in dancing form or following the nymph from behind and trying to hold her hand, trying to convince her to go with him maybe. Here you have the nymph naked for the first time, sitting And here you have the kneeling satyr with two pellets on each side. But if you look at the faces, the heads, the rendition is typical of the Archaic period. And one of the earliest depictions of a kingdom is Macedonian kings. Alexander the First minted his coins in starting from the Archaic period. Some art historians or numismatists would like to put these coins in the classical period, which I wouldn't disagree. But when I look at the rendition of the head, I would like to think that this is late Archaic and early classical period. Wayne Salis proposed that there were coins minted in the classical period designed in archaic style, and he calls them archaizing coins, which these coins might be. But knowing that Alexander the First ruled from 498 to 454, we can maybe squeeze these coins in this period. You have these Macedonian tribes that I mentioned. These were extremely interesting people. They owned some very, very important silver mines, and they mined enormous amounts of silver, and they must have finished them before the 4th century BC. And they exported those the silver that they mined, and they created these huge coins. Here is one that is 33.58 grams, and here is a dodecadrams, 39.97 grams. Numismatists believe that they used a different weight system. That's why they, for instance, a decadram would be 42.5 in the Attic weight standard, but here it's 34 grams is called a decadram. Of course, these names are not the names of those coin pieces. These are rather modern names given to those coins, but they were minted in different denominations, as you see here. 29, 28 grams. They were mostly exported or export items, exported in the form of coins. Abdera is a remarkable city on the shore of the northern part of the Aegean Sea, and its coinage is remarkable with the griffin symbol. And Mende is well known for its choice of ass as the symbol of their city. It is depicted ithypalic, as you see, most of the time, but that's what the city chose to represent themselves. Chersonesus or Chersonesos was a famous city caught in the conflict between the Persians and the Ionian League. He was actually an Athenian aristocrat. In 515 BC, was sent by the Athenian tyrant Hippias to rule the Chersonese, a strategic point in Athens' grain trade. As tyrant of the Chersonese, Miltiades found himself obliged to submit to Persian rule and served in the campaign of Darius I against the Scythians. His Persian allegiance was short-lived, and he joined against Darius in the Ionian revolt. And you can see here how he chose the types of his coins. He sided with the Miletus and used the roaring line on the head, on the obverse of his coin, and then the head of Athena, his allegiance to Athens on the reverse. But the depictions are certainly archaic. Here we have the central Greece. Again, not all the cities that you see here minted coinage at that time, but quite a few of them did so. Delphi is one of the prominent oracles of the ancient times, and of course they minted a lot of coins. This one is really interesting. 3 drams, 18.55 grams. They are very rare, but there are at least several examples known. And rightfully, they chose the head of rams on most of their coins. And of course, a lyre here. Ram is the attribute of Hermes. Apollo gives prophecies, and Hermes carries those prophecies to others. And Boeotia is an interesting place. It is the city of Hesiod, even though he was his family came from Asia. He was born at Askra, near Mount Helicon, the father of didactic poetry. From the beginning, it's a league. It's like Lycians. They had their own distinctive administrative system, and they adopted a shield, a Boeotian shield, as the symbol of their city. And as you see, they come in at least 5 different denominations, if not more, and a clear indication that they were used to facilitate trade. Boya is really interesting. There is an inscription found in this city. It is really remarkable. At this period, or slightly afterward, Eritrea distinguished itself by passing a law which stipulated that a coin had to be kremata dokimaka higai, that is acceptable and good, genuine and not counterfeit. The stone carrying the inscription was part of the ancient city wall. It is now on the exhibit at the entrance of the museum. It's unbelievable how cities took coinage seriously at that time, even though we don't have the mention of coins in ancient, well, in terms of names and denominations, but they were very well known, they were very widely used, and there were the issues around minting and counterfeiting were well known at that time. Athens is, of course, the focus of many numismatists. The early coinage, you still see the phrase or the name that catalogers use, weapons, and for the early coinage of Athens. Although modern scholars have convincingly demonstrated that Seltman created this hypothesis that weapons and type represent the coats of arms of Athens, leading families, is incorrect. Numismatic catalogers have been hard-pressed to find a more suitable designation to describe the series. Why do we need to stick with that? Why don't we just say early Athenian coinage? Why do we have to say weapons or any other name? It's really interesting why people insist on incorrect definitions of certain things. But the earlier coinage, as you see, has nothing to do with the later designs that we see. And I suspect that some of these coins actually come from nearby cities, but not directly from Athens, but it's another discussion. Here we see the clear representation of archaic art on these silver coins that are famously known as Athenian awls. And they also come in many different denominations. Like the Macedonian tribes, Athens had a very productive silver mine. And they used this silver mine to export silver. It was both a currency and an export item for the Athenians. And they started exporting from early on, and this continued until the Hellenistic period. Aegina was the first city that minted coinage in western part of the Aegean. And from the beginning, they adopted turtle as their symbol. Turtle is an attribute of Aphrodite. And this is a sea turtle, of course. And being an island, it's only normal that this city adopted this animal as their symbol. Peloponnesus is another region where you see a lot of cities, not all of them, again, minted coinage in the Archaic period, but there are certain cities that that issued coins for many, many years. Corinthia is one of them. Arcadia is another one, and Argolis is another one. The stylistic features of the Archaic period are very, very visible on the coinage of these cities. You have the archaic style eyes and chins and rigid figures of deities on the coinage of these cities. And finally, we are in Italy, and we will visit Sicily and Italy, Calabria and Taras. Unlike other cities, the coin designers in this region came up with some incredibly different ideas. Here is a coin of Taras. On the obverse, you have the regular embossed figure, and on the reverse, you have the incus of the same figure. Maybe it's not exactly the same figure in the incus, but these are very specially designed coins, and minting of these must be extremely laborious. They are very thin, they're not thick coins to strike. I'm really curious to know if there is a study as to how these coins were designed and minted. This is not the same type. It's a different. It's a coin minted with a different method, but they have other coins with minted in the same technique coming from this city. Lucania is a town that had the same technique, so it must have been known in that area. Was it the same mint issuing or producing these coins? One can argue, or maybe some master engravers and coin minting artisans came from the same workshop. They all learned, and they simply spread to the region and designed coins for different cities. But you have these very interesting coins coming from those cities. Brutium and Caledonia. Here, Caledonia did the same thing. The figures are absolutely archaic. The hairstyle, the eyes, the nose, the chin, and the rigid figures of deities and animals are archaic. And again, from Brutium Croton, they adapted the attributes of Apollo in the form of a tripod. On the reverse, it's the incus of the tripod. And here is an incredible design. On the obverse, you have a tripod, and on the reverse is incus, eagle flying right. I really would like to know how they minted these coins. In Sicily, they had some of the best artists, and they from Archaic period on, they created incredible art. They're going to excel in their profession in the classical period, but you can see how they developed their artistic, already extraordinary artistic skills early on. Akrakas, Gela were two of the prominent cities that employed some very, very skillful coin designers and coin die engravers. The designs, of course, the symbolism is here, and the archaic figures are obvious here and also here. And Messana Zankla, we spoke about the city earlier, but before the incidents of before the incidents that we mentioned before, they had a city by the name Zankle, and it meant sickle, I believe, at that time. That's why you have the figure of a sickle on all the coins of the city from that time. Apparently, they had a harbor in the form of a sickle, and that's why they called the city Zankle, and on the coins you always see that. And another town with some extraordinary coins is Naxos, with the typical archaic depiction of Dionysus on one side, and his attribute, a bunch of grapes, on the other side. Of course, everybody knows Syracuse. Their famous decadrums in the classical period, but as you see, the design comes from the archaic period, and typical archaic depictions of both the obverse and reverse designs. Silenus chose leaf of Selena. So I studied the history of medicine for my master's degree, and I did a research on certain plants depicted on coins. Of course, the most famous one is silphium. That is going to come after this one. But this one also I found during my studies as an important medicinal plant that was famous at that time. Ancient sources say that it was often used as an immunagogue. There are herbs which stimulate blood flow in the pelvic area and uterus. Some stimulate menstruation. Women have used plants such as mugwort, parsley, and ginger to prevent or terminate early pregnancy. Of course, they might have been used for other purposes, but for whatever reason, the city decided to adopt this plant as their symbol. And the final slide here on the coins is about the Cyrenaica region in northern Africa. Their symbol is, of course, silphium from the beginning. It's an extinct plant species of the genus Ferula. It was the badge of the province of Cyrenaica and its most valuable commodity. The silphium soon became widely sought after due to its contraceptive and aphrodisiac properties. Ancient sources such as Pliny the Elder record its use as a relief for various illnesses, including but not limited to asthma, bronchitis, dropsy, epilepsy, tetanus, vaginal inflammations, and warts. Some of these can be exaggerations, but in light of not having any knowledge about things,
that plant's not extinct.
Say it again?
That plant about 10 or 20 years ago was found not to be extinct.
Yes, well, there are suggestions that they still survive, and in Lebanon, but no one has proved that it was actually silphium. Again, under the conditions that we have been going through, you hear a lot of comments by so-called experts and doctors about COVID-19. One says it is such and such, the other one says it is such and such. If we are to follow their words based on their titles, I don't know. No one seems to. No one seems to. They don't come together and and discuss, I guess. Everyone comes up with an idea, and they feel that their idea is the most correct one, and they make it public, and we hear it, and we say, oh, Professor such and such said that such and such is good. So we accept it. Unfortunately, the educational system in the last several centuries simply brainwashed us to believe in what we are told. If someone speaks in an authoritarian way, like me, right at the moment, I'm talking, and I appreciate the fact that you all listen to me, but don't take my words as correct all the time. And we have to use our reason and logic and knowledge to assess the information that we are given and use it accordingly. And here, this is again the same issue. When I studied at the History of Medicine and Deontology department 15 years ago, there were scholars talking about silphium, and but I think they stopped talking about it. There were several articles published in the International History of Medicine journal, and some other people confronted that researcher, and he was unable to produce a proof of what he claimed to be silphium.
Oh.
Anyways, if I would be extremely happy and ecstatic if it still survives, because it would be great. Well, we have a lot of plants that have survived over the centuries. Fig trees, we still have them, and we still have parsley. We still have other plants, but not silphium, I guess. And one of the depictions here that I would like to draw your attention, and many people believe that these are the fruit, and many people believe that the modern conception of heart is derived from this symbol. Okay. I have some further reading suggestions here. You're most welcome to look at them. There are very interesting books to read about the Archaic period. They're not all dedicated to that time period, but you can find a lot of good information in those books. Then, of course, next time we will get together to talk about the classical period. But before that, if you have any questions, I will be happy to try to answer.